Leave the car! My mother-in-law's scream echoed down the quiet suburban street just as I eased my foot onto the accelerator. I looked into the rearview mirror. Patricia was running after my Porsche Cayenne in white sandals, waving one arm wildly as if she could command me to stop by sheer force of habit. Behind me, my 3-year-old son, Noah, sat silently in his car seat. He wasn't crying. That hurt more. His tiny fingers clutched his favorite little red toy truck, while his wide eyes stayed fixed on the back window, watching his grandmother disappear behind us. Children don't always understand the words adults say, but they always remember how those words made them feel. Patricia believed she'd just thrown me out of her son's house. She believed I'd driven away in her son's Porsche. She believed she'd finally put her disrespectful daughter-in-law in her place. By breakfast the next morning, the first crack in that fantasy would appear. Within a week, everything she'd believed about her son would begin falling apart. 20 minutes earlier, our backyard had been filled with laughter. George's retirement barbecue had been my idea. My father-in-law had worked for nearly 40 years before finally deciding it was time to slow down. He deserved something special. So despite working full-time during the week and spending my weekend at Army Reserve training, I'd spent 2 evenings marinating meat, preparing side dishes, decorating the patio, and making sure every relative had somewhere comfortable to sit. The weather couldn't have been more perfect. Children chased each other across the lawn. George laughed louder than I'd heard in years. Neighbors waved from across the fence. For almost an hour, everything felt normal. Then Patricia began talking. At first, the comment sounded harmless. "My Daniel has always worked so hard." She smiled proudly at George's sister. "He finally gave this family a proper home." A few relatives nodded. No one looked at me. I told myself, let it go. She doesn't know any better. 5 years of marriage had taught me something dangerous. Sometimes, keeping the peace became a habit so natural, you stopped noticing the price. A few minutes later, my cousin-in-law admired the flower beds lining the backyard. Patricia smiled. Daniel insisted on landscaping the whole property after they got married. I was standing less than 6 feet away, holding a pitcher of lemonade. Daniel heard every word. He didn't correct her. He simply flipped another hamburger on the grill. The knot in my stomach tightened. It wasn't the first time. Over the years, I'd heard dozens of little stories. Daniel bought the house. Daniel surprised me with the Porsche. Daniel made sure I never wanted for anything. Every lie sounded small by itself. Together, they built a life that never belonged to him. The worst part wasn't Patricia believing them. It was realizing someone had to keep telling those lies for them to survive. I carried a bowl of potato salad onto the patio. Patricia looked me up and down before smiling politely. "That's a pretty dress." I thanked her. She tilted her head. "Did Daniel buy that one too?" A couple of relatives laughed awkwardly. One quickly looked down at his paper plate. George frowned slightly, but said nothing. Daniel kept staring at the grill. I waited. Just one sentence. "Actually, Mom, that's all it would have taken." It never came. Noah ran across the yard carrying bubbles in both hands. Patricia bent down and brushed the hair away from his forehead. Her voice became louder, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "One day you'll understand. Your daddy is the reason you have such a beautiful house." Noah smiled. He had no idea what she meant. But I did. I slowly set my glass onto the patio table. Patricia. She looked up. Please don't tell my son things that aren't true. The backyard fell silent. Even the children seemed quieter. Patricia stood up slowly. Her smile disappeared. What did you just say? I asked you not to undermine me in front of Noah. Her face flushed. After everything this family has done for you, you choose George's retirement party to embarrass me? I didn't embarrass you. I corrected something that wasn't true. She pressed a hand dramatically against her chest. You hear that? She looked toward the relatives. I welcome this woman into my family. And this is how she repays me? For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Daniel finally walked over. Relief washed through me. Finally, he was going to end this. He looked at his mother, then at me. His jaw tightened, not because he disagreed with Patricia, because everyone was watching. Claire. His voice was calm, almost rehearsed. Apologize to my mother. For a moment, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. What? You heard me. You want me to apologize for asking your mother not to lie to our son? His expression hardened. Don't make this worse. I'm making it worse? Several relatives quietly stepped backward. George opened his mouth as if he wanted to speak, then closed it again. Patricia folded her arms, waiting, watching, enjoying every second. Daniel took one more step toward me. If you can't respect my mother, then maybe you shouldn't be here. I stared at him. This is my home. He answered without hesitation. Then choose. I felt something inside me grow perfectly still. He continued. Apologize, or pack your things and get out of my life. The words weren't what broke me. It was where he said them. In front of our son. In front of both families. In front of neighbors. In front of the people who believed every lie he'd spent years building. Noah looked up at me. Daddy mad? I knelt beside him. No, sweetheart. I kissed the top of his head. We're just leaving for a little while. I walked into the house. Didn't slam a single door. Didn't shout. Didn't cry. I took Noah's overnight bag from the hall closet, his favorite blanket, his stuffed dinosaur. Nothing else. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Daniel. He followed me all the way to the front porch. He never once said, stay. As I buckled Noah into his car seat, Patricia stormed down the driveway. Leave the car, she screamed. That belongs to Daniel. I looked at her through the open driver's window. For just a second. There were 100 things I could have said. Instead, I simply closed the door, started the engine, and drove away. In the mirror, I watched Patricia chasing the Porsche she'd believed her son had bought. Neither she nor Daniel had any idea that every document connected to the house behind them and the SUV disappearing down the street had exactly one name printed on it. Mine. 10 minutes later, Noah had fallen asleep in the hotel room after I read him the same bedtime story twice. I sent Daniel our location. I offered him a video call with his son. Whatever happened between us, I refused to use Noah as a weapon. My message showed as delivered. It remained unread. I stared out the hotel window at the parking lot below. 5 years of marriage, one barbecue, one sentence. Get out of my life. Funny how quickly a marriage can reveal what it has really been standing on. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Daniel. It was Elena Morales, the estate attorney my grandmother had insisted I keep in touch with long before I got married. She answered before I could speak. Claire, I assume this call means something finally happened. I closed my eyes. Yes, it did. There was a brief silence. Then Elena quietly asked the question that would change everything. When your husband told you to leave tonight, did he know whose name is actually on the deed? I didn't answer Elena immediately. Instead, I looked through the hotel window at Noah sleeping beneath the thin white comforter. Children have a way of falling asleep even when the adults around them have just shattered their world. I wished I could do the same. Finally, I whispered, "No. He thinks the house is his." Elena was quiet for a moment. And his mother? She believes it even more. Another pause. Then she said something that would replay in my mind for months. Claire, they're not arguing over property. They're arguing over a story. And people will defend a story they've believed for years much harder than they'll defend the truth. At 8 o'clock the following morning, Elena called Daniel. I wasn't on the line. I didn't need to be. For 5 years, every difficult conversation between us had ended the same way. Daniel would get angry. I'd back down. Peace would return. At least, something that looked like peace. Elena wasn't married to Daniel. She wasn't afraid of his silence. And she certainly wasn't interested in protecting his pride. When she called me 15 minutes later, her voice was steady. He was angry. I expected that. But he listened. That surprised me. What did you tell him? Nothing dramatic. I informed him you've retained counsel regarding a temporary separation. I also advised him not to sell, refinance, transfer, or borrow against either the house or the Porsche until ownership records are formally reviewed. I almost laughed. Reviewed? They're perfectly clear. I know. But sometimes, people hear the truth better when they believe a document is about to remind them. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. Daniel, I answered. The first thing he asked wasn't about Noah. It wasn't whether we'd slept safely. It wasn't whether we needed anything. His voice was tight. What exactly did you tell your lawyer? I told her the truth. You've turned one argument into a legal battle. No. I looked at Noah coloring quietly beside the hotel window. You turned one barbecue into a separation. He sighed loudly. You know what I mean. I do. And I also know you never asked how your son is. Silence. Then, almost reluctantly, how's Noah? Confused. He keeps asking why Daddy wanted Mommy to leave. Daniel didn't answer, because there wasn't an answer that wouldn't expose what he'd done. Finally, he tried another direction. Mom got carried away. I closed my eyes. No. She said exactly what she believed. And she believes it because someone taught her to. Another silence. Longer this time. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying since I left the driveway. Daniel, Why does your mother think she has the authority to throw me out of my own house? His answer didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, like someone slowly pulling bricks from a wall they'd spent years building. It started after we got married. What started? Mom kept comparing me to Mark, his older brother, the successful dentist, the one with the lake house, the luxury vacations, the expensive practice. Every family dinner became another reminder that Daniel wasn't enough. One Sunday, Mom complimented the house. He hesitated. I told her I'd bought it. I said nothing, because I wanted him to keep talking. She asked why your name was on the deed. I told her it was for tax reasons. I looked out the hotel window. Cars came and went, people carried coffee. The world outside kept moving. Inside, mine had stopped. And the Porsche? I asked quietly. Daniel's voice became even smaller. I told them it was an anniversary gift. I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because suddenly, so many conversations from the last 5 years finally made sense. Every compliment, every sideways glance, every joke about how lucky I was to marry such a successful man. They'd all been built on the same lie. You never corrected them. I know. You let your mother believe I depended on you. I know. You let your relatives believe everything I owned came from you. I know. And yesterday, you let your mother order me out of property she had absolutely no right to control. Daniel whispered, I know. For a second, I almost believed he understood. Then he ruined it. I just need you to apologize to Mom. I actually laughed. One short, disbelieving laugh. Daniel, you still think your mother's feelings are the biggest problem? That afternoon, I met Elena in her office. She already had copies of every document spread across the conference table. The deed, the original inheritance paperwork, the Porsche title, purchase records, bank statements, everything. My grandmother was very thorough. Elena smiled. Ruth was many things. Disorganized wasn't one of them. She slid the deed toward me. I've reviewed everything. There's no ambiguity. The house was inherited before your marriage. The vehicle was purchased using proceeds from inherited property. Both remained legally separate. I nodded. I know. What worries me isn't the law. She folded her hands. I know. It's what comes next. She was right. Because property wasn't the real issue anymore. Trust was. Before I left, Elena asked one more question. Has Daniel ever made major financial decisions without discussing them first? I frowned. Nothing important. You should check. Why? She didn't answer immediately. Then she quietly said, people willing to lie about ownership sometimes become comfortable hiding other things too. That evening, the first 16 months of our joint bank statements arrived. I expected ordinary expenses, groceries, utilities, preschool tuition. Instead, one transfer caught my attention. $300. Recipient, George Bennett. Then another, 800. Then 600. Another. By the time I reached the last page, my hands had gone cold. Nearly $12,000 had quietly disappeared from our joint savings over 16 months. Not once, not dramatically. Slowly, patiently, almost invisibly. Each transfer carried a harmless description. Roof repair, dad, car payment, family. Individually, none of them looked suspicious. Together, they told an entirely different story. I called Daniel immediately. He answered on the second ring. I was already going to tell you. Were you? When? He stopped. My parents needed help. So you helped them? Yes. With our savings? I was going to replace it. You didn't answer my question. His breathing became heavier. I knew you'd probably say no. There it was. Not forgetfulness. Not poor communication. A decision. He hadn't hidden the transfers because he'd forgotten. He'd hidden them because he'd already decided my opinion didn't matter. After the call, I sat alone in Elena's office long after she'd gone home. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. I spread the bank statements beside the deed, then beside the Porsche title. 3 separate piles. 3 separate truths. The lies about the house, the lies about the car, the hidden money. Individually, each one looked survivable. Together, they painted a marriage I barely recognized. Just then, my phone vibrated. A text from Daniel. Only 7 words. Mom wants to come apologize tomorrow morning. I stared at the message for a long time. Then another notification appeared. This one wasn't from Daniel. It was from our next-door neighbor. Claire, I think you should know something. Patricia has been telling everyone on the street you're trying to steal Daniel's house. I didn't answer my neighbor's message. Not immediately. Instead, I locked my phone and stared out the hotel window. Rumors spread faster than truth because they only needed confidence. Truth needed evidence. And fortunately for me, I had plenty. The next morning, Patricia never came. Instead, Daniel called. Mom doesn't think it's a good idea anymore. I wasn't surprised. What changed? He hesitated. She thinks bringing lawyers into this means you've already decided to destroy the family. No, I replied calmly. I decided to protect myself. Those aren't the same thing. By noon, 3 different relatives had contacted me. None of them asked what happened. They asked variations of the same question. Did you really kick Daniel out of his own house? Why are you taking everything? Couldn't you work this out privately? It amazed me how quickly a lie could become accepted fact. No one had seen the deed. No one had seen the Porsche title. No one had seen Danielle tell me to leave. They had only heard Patricia's version. And Patricia told stories with absolute certainty. Elena smiled when I showed her the messages. Good. I looked at her. Good? They're committing to one version. So? So, when the truth comes out, every contradiction becomes obvious. She leaned back in her chair. Claire, don't chase rumors. Let the people spreading them paint themselves into a corner. That afternoon, I met Daniel at a coffee shop halfway between the hotel and his office. Not to reconcile. To exchange Noah's favorite stuffed dinosaur he'd accidentally left behind. He arrived 10 minutes early, Dark circles sat beneath his eyes. For the first few minutes, we talked only about Noah, his preschool, his sleeping, his favorite dinosaur book. It almost felt normal. Then Daniel quietly asked, "Can we stop all this?" I looked at him. What exactly is all this? The lawyers, the separation, my parents, our family. I folded Noah's dinosaur carefully into the overnight bag. Daniel, your family became involved the moment your mother told me to leave my own home. He rubbed both hands together. I know. No. You know what happened. You still don't understand why. He frowned. What do you mean? I leaned forward. Yesterday, 3 relatives contacted me. They all believe I'm trying to steal your property. Daniel closed his eyes. I'll talk to them. Why didn't you already? Silence. Because every hour you stay quiet, the lie grows. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I was embarrassed. About what? My family. No. About yourself. His shoulders sank, because he knew I was right. When I returned to the hotel, Elena had already finished reviewing the bank records. She tapped one transfer with her pen. This one, $800. What about it? It wasn't for roof repairs. I frowned. How do you know? Because I called the roofing company. I blinked. You what? The invoice was only $320. The room suddenly felt colder. So where did the rest go? I don't know. Yet. By the following afternoon, the answer arrived. Daniel admitted it himself. My parents were behind on their credit cards. I didn't want them to worry. So you used our savings? Yes. And then labeled it roof repair. He looked away. I thought it sounded easier. Easier for who? He couldn't answer. That evening, George called me. Not Patricia. George. His voice sounded tired. Claire. I need to ask you something. Of course. Is the house really yours? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked him something first. If I tell you the truth, will you actually want to hear it? He sighed. I've spent 40 years fixing machines. I've learned they don't repair themselves by pretending nothing is broken. I smiled sadly. No, they don't. The next morning, George came alone. Not to my hotel, to Elena's office. He carried a worn baseball cap in both hands and looked older than he had at the retirement barbecue. Elena placed a deed in front of him. He read it slowly. My name. Only my name. Purchase history. Inheritance documents. Then came the Porsche title. Again, only my name. George removed his glasses. For nearly a full minute, he didn't speak. Finally, he whispered, My God. I thought Daniel bought all of this. I know. He told us he did. I know. George closed his eyes. Then Patricia doesn't know either. No. She honestly believes I threw you out of my son's house. I nodded. She believes exactly what Daniel wanted her to believe. George leaned back heavily. The disappointment on his face wasn't directed at me. It was directed at himself. I should have asked more questions. Before leaving, George stopped at the doorway. Would you meet with the family? I looked at him. For what purpose? So everyone hears the truth. I thought about it, then slowly shook my head. I won't expose Daniel. George frowned. You won't? No. If your son has the courage to fix this, he needs to tell the truth himself. George stared at me for several seconds. Then he quietly nodded. You're a better person than we've treated you. That evening, George called Daniel. I wasn't on the call, but I didn't need to be. Less than 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice sounded different, quieter. My dad wants everyone to meet. I know. He says, I have to tell the family everything. I waited. And? He took a deep breath. I'm scared. For the first time since the barbecue, I believed him. Not because he feared losing me, because he feared losing the version of himself he'd spent years creating. 3 days later, we met inside a family counselor's office. Neutral ground. No one could claim the room belonged to them. George arrived first, then Patricia, then Daniel. Patricia carried a thick folder under one arm. She walked in with the confidence of someone who believed she was finally going to prove she had been right all along. She looked directly at me. I brought documents. I almost smiled. So did I. She placed her folder on the table. So, before your lawyer starts making accusations, I'd like everyone to understand exactly how much my son sacrificed for this family. George slowly turned toward Daniel. Son, he spoke calmly. So there's no confusion. Before anyone opens a single folder, I want one answer. He paused. Then asked the question that made Daniel's face lose every trace of color. Who actually owns the house? The room became so quiet, I could hear the clock on the counselor's wall. Tick, tick, tick. George never looked at me. His eyes stayed on his son. Daniel, I asked you a question. Who owns the house? For several seconds, Daniel couldn't speak. The silence stretched so long that even Patricia began looking uncomfortable. Finally, he whispered, Claire. George frowned. I didn't hear you. Daniel slowly lifted his head. The house belongs to Claire. Patricia laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. Daniel, this isn't the time for jokes. I'm not joking. She looked around the room. Tell him. Tell your father you're trying to calm everyone down. Daniel closed his eyes. I'm telling the truth. The house was Claire's before we got married. No. You bought it. No. You told me you signed the mortgage. I lied. You said her name was only on the paperwork. I lied. You said you surprised her with that Porsche. I lied. Every answer landed harder than the one before. Patricia stared at him, as if she'd never seen him before. George slowly pushed his chair back. How long? Daniel swallowed. 5 years. 5 years, George repeated quietly. You let your mother believe something that wasn't true for 5 years? Daniel nodded. Yes. George didn't raise his voice. Some disappointments don't need volume. They applauded you. They admired you. They defended you. And every compliment belonged to someone else. Nobody spoke, not even the counselor, because there was nothing to interrupt. The truth was finally doing its own work. Patricia suddenly turned toward me. You knew. I knew what? You knew we believed Daniel bought everything. Yes. And you never corrected us. I corrected you yesterday. You humiliated me! I met her eyes calmly. No. I refused to let you teach my son something that wasn't true. Her breathing quickened. You should have told me years ago. I should have, I answered honestly. But I wasn't the one repeating the lie. For the first time, Patricia had nowhere to look except at her son. She spoke more softly now. Why? Daniel stared at the floor. I got tired of being compared to Mark, his older brother. The successful dentist, the lake house, the vacations, the practice. You were always proud of him. So one day, when you complimented Claire's house, I let you believe it was mine. He forced out a bitter smile. And after that, every lie needed another one. Patricia slowly sat back down. The confidence she'd carried into the room had disappeared. So, every time I thanked you, every time I bragged about you, I was praising something that never belonged to you. Daniel nodded. I know. And yesterday, I screamed at Claire to get out of her own house. Yes. The counselor finally spoke. Claire, what would you like to say? I looked at Patricia, then at Daniel, finally at George. I didn't come here to embarrass anyone. I came because my son watched his father choose a lie over his mother. The room remained silent. I can replace money. I can replace furniture. I can even replace a marriage. I looked toward Daniel. But I can't erase what Noah heard. Daniel's shoulders collapsed. I'm sorry. I nodded slightly. I believe you are. But that's not the same thing as accepting responsibility. George suddenly spoke. What else? Daniel looked confused. What? If we're telling the truth today, tell all of it. Daniel's face tightened. There isn't, George interrupted him. Don't. I've heard enough lies. Tell us everything. Daniel took a long breath. There is something else. He looked toward me. I was going to tell you. When? I don't know. When it became impossible to hide. He looked away again. My parents have been struggling financially. George frowned. What does that have to do with Claire? Daniel answered quietly. I've been sending you money. George looked confused. I know. But where did it come from? Another long silence. Then Daniel whispered, our joint savings. George's face drained of color. Patricia turned sharply toward him. "You told me it was your bonuses." Daniel nodded. "I know. You said the company rewarded you." "I know." "You said Claire didn't need to know." "I know." George slowly removed his glasses. His hands were shaking now. "You took money from your wife without asking her, and then lied to us about where it came from." Daniel couldn't even look at him. "Yes." For a moment, Patricia looked genuinely shocked. Then something unexpected happened. She turned toward George. "You knew we needed help." George nodded. "Yes. I thought the money was his." "So did I. I would have never accepted it if I'd known." I believed her. Because unlike the house, the money had fooled everyone. The counselor quietly asked, "Claire, did you know about these transfers?" I slid a thin folder onto the table, bank statements, highlighted, month after month. "I found out 3 days ago." Patricia reached for the papers. $300, $800, $500. Again, again, again. Her lips trembled. There were this many? Daniel didn't answer, because the documents already had. For the first time since this meeting began, Patricia looked directly at me. Not with anger, not with pride, with something much harder to fake. Shame. She stopped, tried again. "I'm sorry if—" I gently raised my hand. She froze. I spoke quietly. "Please don't." She looked confused. "If isn't an apology." The counselor remained silent, allowing the moment to breathe. I continued. "An apology doesn't begin by questioning how someone else felt. It begins by naming what you did." Patricia lowered her eyes. For nearly 30 seconds, she said nothing. Then, without looking at anyone, she whispered, "I humiliated you. I treated you like you depended on my son. I shouted at you about a house and a car that were never his." A tear rolled down her cheek, and your little boy heard every word. No one in the room moved, not even Daniel, because everyone understood this was the first truthful sentence Patricia had spoken since the barbecue. Just then, Daniel slowly reached into his jacket pocket. "I should have done this before today." He placed his phone on the table. "I've already written a message." George frowned. "What message?" Daniel looked at me. "I wrote to every relative who was at Dad's retirement party. I admitted the house was yours. The Porsche was yours. The lies were mine. I haven't sent it yet." He swallowed hard. "I wanted you to read it first." I looked at the phone. My fingers hovered over it. Then, before I could pick it up, Patricia suddenly stood. Her face had changed again. She looked at Daniel, then at me, and asked the one question that made the entire room tense all over again. "If everyone finds out, are you divorcing my son anyway?" No one answered Patricia. Not immediately. The question hung over the room like smoke after a fire. If everyone finds out, are you divorcing my son anyway? She wasn't really asking about the marriage. She was asking whether telling the truth would still cost Daniel everything. I looked at her for several long seconds before answering. I don't know. That was the most honest answer I could give. The room relaxed just enough for everyone to breathe again. I haven't decided whether this marriage can survive. I've only decided that it can't survive another lie. Daniel lowered his eyes. For the first time since we'd married, he didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He didn't ask for another chance. He simply nodded. I understand. I believed he meant it. That didn't mean I trusted him. The counselor finally broke the silence. Claire, what do you want today? Not next month. Not next year. Today. I answered without hesitation. I want 3 things. I looked first at Daniel. The lies end. Then at George and Patricia. My son is never placed in the middle. Finally, back to Daniel. And every dollar taken from our joint savings is accounted for. No more, no less. Daniel nodded. I'll repay everything. George immediately shook his head. No. Daniel looked confused. Dad? George raised a hand. No. If that money came from both of you, then your mother and I accepted it under false pretenses. He turned toward me. Claire. I can't return $12,000 today. Our retirement savings simply aren't there. His voice cracked. But we'll make this right. Before I could answer, Daniel interrupted. No. This isn't your debt. It was my decision. I'll repay every cent. George looked at his son for a long moment, then quietly said, This is the first responsible thing I've heard you say. Patricia still hadn't moved. She stared at the deed lying on the table. So, all these years, I kept thanking my son for a life you built. I nodded. Yes. She closed the folder she'd carried into the meeting. No one had asked to see it. Curious, the counselor glanced toward her. What was inside? Patricia looked embarrassed. Mortgage estimates, property tax printouts, neighborhood values. She managed a sad smile. I thought they would prove Daniel owned the house. Instead, they had become proof of how completely she'd accepted a story without ever asking for evidence. Before we left, Daniel handed me his phone. I want you to read it. The message addressed every relative who had attended George's retirement barbecue. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't defensive. It simply told the truth, that the house had always belonged to me, that the Porsche had been purchased with my inheritance, that his mother had believed otherwise because he'd lied, that I had never kept Noah from him, that every cruel thing said to me at the barbecue had happened because he lacked the courage to speak. When I finished reading, I handed the phone back. You don't need my permission. He nodded once, then, without another word, pressed send. The responses started arriving less than 10 minutes later. Some relatives apologized immediately. Others asked why Daniel had lied in the first place. A few didn't reply at all. Silence, I'd learned, could also be an admission. That afternoon, Elena and I finalized temporary separation terms. Daniel would rent an apartment close to Noah's preschool. He would have scheduled parenting time every week. Neither of us would speak negatively about the other in front of Noah. Major financial decisions required written agreement. Joint accounts would remain untouched until every transaction had been reviewed. It wasn't revenge. It was structure. When trust disappears, structure keeps people from making even bigger mistakes. 2 days later, Daniel came to collect his clothes. We'd agreed to do it while Noah was at the park with my cousin. The house felt strangely unfamiliar. He walked upstairs carrying empty boxes. Neither of us spoke much. Every room contained memories. The hallway where we'd painted together. The kitchen where Noah had taken his first steps. The guest room, the one he'd promised to his parents without ever asking me. He stopped there for a moment. I never should have done that. No, you shouldn't have. He didn't defend himself. He simply taped another cardboard box shut. As he carried the final box toward the front door, he stopped. I know this probably doesn't matter, but I never stopped loving you. I looked at him. I don't doubt that. His face softened for the first time. Then I finished the sentence. I doubt whether you respected me. The words hit harder than if I'd shouted, because they were true. Daniel lowered his head. I don't think I understood the difference. I know. After he drove away, the house became unbearably quiet. His coffee mug still sat beside the sink. I picked it up. For several seconds, I considered putting it into a moving box. Instead, I placed it inside a cabinet where I wouldn't have to see it every morning, not because I was waiting for him, because I wasn't ready to decide what that mug meant. That night, while I tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at me with the innocent seriousness only children possess. Mommy, did Daddy leave because Grandma said you were bad? Every adult argument, every legal document, every bank statement, every lie suddenly felt insignificant. I pulled him into my arms. No, sweetheart. Daddy left because grown-ups sometimes make very bad choices. You didn't do anything wrong. And Mommy and Daddy both love you very much. He nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. Children don't need perfect explanations. They need safe ones. The following afternoon, Daniel and I repeated those same words together during a video call. No blaming, no excuses, no promises we couldn't guarantee. Just reassurance. After Noah waved goodbye, Daniel remained on the screen. I started counseling today. I nodded. Good. My counselor asked me one question. What was it? He gave a tired smile. She asked whose approval I was protecting. I already knew the answer. So did I. 1 week later, Patricia left a voicemail. I expected another justification, another excuse, another version of, I'm sorry you felt that way. Instead, her voice shook from the very first sentence. Claire, I humiliated you. I treated you as though everything you had belonged to my son. I screamed at you in front of Noah, and I helped make your own home feel unsafe. There was no if, no but, no blame, just responsibility. When the recording ended, I listened to it again, not because I was ready to forgive her, Because I wanted to know whether people could really change. I still wasn't sure. 3 months passed. Daniel never missed a parenting exchange, never arrived late, never argued about expenses. Every repayment toward the $12,000 was documented exactly as promised. Every counseling session was attended. Every boundary was respected. It wasn't dramatic. It was consistent. And consistency is harder to fake than emotion. Then one afternoon, Patricia sent a short text. "Would you meet George and me at the park? Just 30 minutes. No pressure." I stared at the message for a long time. Finally, I typed one word. Okay. I didn't know it yet, but that 30-minute conversation would determine whether Noah's grandmother still had a place in his future. When I arrived at the park, George was already there. He sat on a weathered wooden bench, helping Noah push a tiny toy truck through the cracks in the concrete. Patricia stood several feet away. Not because anyone had told her to, because she seemed unsure whether she'd earned the right to come any closer. That alone told me more than any apology ever could. Noah spotted me first. "Mommy!" He ran toward me, laughing. Then he turned back toward Patricia. "Grandma didn't yell today." The words were innocent. The silence that followed wasn't. Patricia lowered her head. "I know." She whispered it more to herself than to anyone else. George stood. "I'll take Noah to feed the ducks." He looked at Patricia. "You two need a few minutes." She nodded gratefully. As they walked away, Patricia remained standing, hands folded together. No dramatic speech, no tears. Just a woman who suddenly looked much older than I remembered. "I've rehearsed this conversation all week." She gave a weak smile. "And every version sounded like I was trying to defend myself. So, I'm not going to." I waited. I spent years believing I knew exactly who you were. I thought you married my son because he could provide for you. I admired him, while quietly judging you. She shook her head. The truth was almost the opposite. I didn't interrupt. For once, she didn't need correcting. My biggest mistake wasn't believing Daniel. She looked toward Noah. It was believing I had the right to decide your worth. A breeze rustled the trees above us. Children laughed somewhere across the playground. Life carried on around us, completely unaware that an entire family was trying to rebuild itself. "I can't ask you to forgive me," Patricia continued, "because forgiveness isn't something I'm entitled to. I only wanted you to know I finally understand what I took from you." She looked directly into my eyes. "I didn't just embarrass you. I made you feel like a guest inside your own home." I felt my throat tighten, not because the pain returned, because someone had finally named it correctly. "I appreciate you saying that." It was the first encouraging sentence I'd spoken to her since the barbecue. She noticed. A tiny flicker of hope crossed her face, then disappeared almost immediately. "I don't expect things to go back to normal." They can't. No, they can't. George and Noah returned carrying pieces of stale bread. Noah proudly held out one last crumb. "Grandma let me feed the biggest duck." Patricia smiled, but before taking his hand, she looked at me. Not asking, waiting. I nodded once. Only then did she reach for him. A small moment, one that probably meant nothing to anyone watching from across the park. To us, it meant everything. Respect had replaced assumption. Over the following months, life settled into a routine none of us had imagined. Daniel kept attending counseling. He repaid every dollar he'd taken from our joint savings. Not once did I have to remind him. George and Patricia never arrived at the house unannounced again. If they wanted to visit Noah, they called first. Sometimes I said yes, sometimes I said no. For the first time, everyone accepted that no was a complete sentence. One Saturday afternoon, Noah celebrated his 4th birthday. Nothing extravagant, just family, a few neighbors, cake, balloons, children running across the backyard. The same backyard where everything had fallen apart 4 months earlier. This time, the atmosphere felt different, lighter, earned. Not because everyone had forgotten, because no one was pretending it hadn't happened. Patricia arrived carrying a wrapped dinosaur book. She stopped beside me before joining the others. I have a question. I looked at her. If the answer is no, I promise I'll accept it. I smiled faintly. That's already progress. She laughed quietly, then asked, "May I help Noah cut his cake?" Such a simple request. Months earlier, she would have assumed permission wasn't necessary. Now? She asked. I looked toward Noah. What do you think, birthday boy? He grinned. Grandma can help. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. Not because she'd been forgiven. Because she'd been trusted. Just a little. Later that afternoon, Daniel and I found ourselves alone near the patio. The children were chasing bubbles. George was grilling burgers. Patricia was helping Noah open presents. Daniel watched them for a long moment. I almost lost all of this. You did. I know. He nodded slowly. I used to think being a good husband meant providing. I didn't answer. My counselor keeps saying, providing isn't the same as protecting. He looked at me. I protected my ego, not my family. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to argue, because he'd finally reached the conclusion on his own. As the sun began to set, our guests slowly left. The backyard grew quiet again. Daniel picked up the last folding chair. I'll take these to the garage. He stopped halfway there, then turned back. Claire? Yeah? I know we're still separated. I know reconciliation isn't guaranteed. I know trust isn't something you owe me. He took a slow breath, but whether we're married a year from now or only co-parenting, thank you for refusing to let me stay the man I was. I looked at him for a long time, then answered honestly. I didn't do that. You did. You just finally stopped running from the truth. He nodded. No promises, no dramatic embrace, no movie ending. Just two people acknowledging how much damage honesty had uncovered, and how much work honesty would still require. That night, after Noah fell asleep, I walked through the house alone. The same hallway, the same kitchen, the same front door. I paused beside the living room window. From there, I could see the driveway, where Patricia had once chased my Porsche, screaming for me to stop. Back then, she believed I was driving away with her son's car. She believed she was defending her family. She believed power came from ownership. Months later, I understood something she hadn't. The house had never been the real foundation of our family. Neither had the Porsche. Neither had the money. The strongest relationships aren't built on who owns what. They're built on who tells the truth, especially when telling it costs them the most. Some people will hear this story and say I should have divorced Daniel the moment he told me to leave. Others will say people deserve the chance to change. Maybe both are right. Maybe neither is. Every family has a line that can't be crossed. Mine wasn't crossed because someone lied about a house. It was crossed because the people I loved believed I mattered less than the story they wanted to tell. And the day that story finally collapsed, our family didn't magically heal. It simply received something it had been missing all along. The chance to rebuild on the truth.